Have you ever noticed how some of the most broken people on the inside are precisely those who seem the most calm on the outside? How those who carry the deepest wounds are often the ones who talk about them the least. There's a type of pain that is so intense, so overwhelming, that the only way to survive it is through silence. A silence that isn't choice, but necessity. A silence that isn't peace, but protection. And today, I want to talk about this silence that hides the deepest pain. Because maybe you're one of those people who learn to suffer in secret, and it's time to understand why this happens and how it's affecting your life in ways you can't even imagine. When we think about emotional pain, we often imagine crying, screaming, dramatic expressions of suffering. But there's a category of pain that is completely different. It's the pain that settles so deeply in the soul that any attempt to express it seems impossible, inadequate, even dangerous. It's the pain that isn't born from a specific traumatic event, but from years and years of small wounds that were never treated, emotional needs that were never met, loneliness so deep it became a second skin. This is the pain that hides in silence, because those who carry it learned, often from very early on, that their pain isn't welcome in the world. Imagine a child who grows up in an environment where expressing sadness is seen as weakness, where crying results in rejection, where sharing fear generates impatience. This child quickly learns a cruel lesson. Their pain bothers others. Their vulnerability is a burden. Their feelings are a problem to be solved quickly, or better yet, ignored completely. And so, little by little, this child develops a skill they'll carry into adult life, the ability to suffer in silence, not by choice but for survival. But here's the truth. No one tells you about this type of silence. It's not protection, it's prison. When you learn to hide your pain so deeply that even you can't easily access it, you're not protecting yourself. You're disconnecting. You're creating a distance between who you really are and who you need to be to survive in the world. And this distance, over time, becomes such a vast chasm that you can spend your entire life trying to find a bridge back to yourself. Think with me. When was the last time you really allowed someone to see your genuine vulnerability? When was the last time you cried in front of another person without feeling ashamed? When was the last time you asked for help not to solve a practical problem, but simply because you were feeling lost, alone, in pieces? If you're struggling to answer these questions, you might be one of those people who carries the deepest pain exactly where no one can see it, in the silence of your heart. And here's something that might surprise you. People who suffer in silence are often the most empathetic, the most careful with others' feelings, the first to offer support when someone is going through difficulties. They became experts at reading others' emotions because they had to develop this skill to navigate emotionally unsafe environments. They know exactly what to say to console someone because they intimately know the pain of lacking consolation. They are the most attentive ears, the most available shoulders, the most understanding hearts. But when it comes to receiving that same care, they simply don't know how to ask, how to accept, how to believe they deserve it. The cruel paradox is that these people often become the emotional pillars of their families, friend groups, work environments. Everyone turns to them when they need support, advice, a stabilizing presence. And they take on this role not just out of kindness, but because that's how they learn to have value in the world. Their pain taught them that the only way to be loved is by being useful. The only way not to be abandoned is by being indispensable. The only way not to bother anyone with their problems is by not having visible problems. But let's go deeper because there's an even more complex layer to this dynamic. People who hide pain in silence often develop what I call invisible suffering syndrome. They become so good at masking their pain that sometimes even they don't realize how much they're suffering. They normalize levels of sadness, loneliness, despair that would be unbearable for most people. They learn to function with a constant level of emotional pain, like someone who learns to walk with a stone in their shoe and eventually forgets it wasn't supposed to hurt. Let me tell you a story that might resonate with you. I knew a person who was known by everyone as the strong one, the one who never breaks, the family rock. For decades, she was the safe harbor for everyone around her. Marriages that were falling apart, children with problems, elderly parents, friends in crisis. Everyone turned to her, and she always had a word of comfort, a practical solution, a reassuring presence, until the day she herself had a breakdown. a breakdown so sudden and overwhelming that it caught everyone by surprise. "But she was always so strong," they said. "We never imagined she was going through this." The truth is, she had been going through it for years, maybe decades. It's just that her pain was silent, invisible, socially acceptable, because it didn't bother anyone. And here we reach one of the most painful truths about this pattern. Our society rewards silent suffering. We praise people who don't complain, who overcome everything alone, who are never a burden to anyone. We create a cultural ideal where strength is measured by the ability not to show weakness, where maturity is defined by the skill of resolving everything internally, where a person's value is directly related to their capacity to not need help. And thus, inadvertently, we create a world where the most wounded people are precisely those who seem most whole. The result of this is devastating, because when you spend your entire life hiding your pain, you don't just disconnect from others, you disconnect from yourself. You lose the ability to identify your own emotional needs. You stop recognizing the signs that you're overloaded, exhausted, reaching your limit. You develop such a high tolerance for suffering that you only notice something is wrong when you're already in critical condition. Worse still, you begin to believe that your pain isn't valid. You look around and see people with real problems, illnesses, losses, obvious tragedies, and conclude that your inner suffering doesn't matter. You minimize your own experience, disqualify your feelings, convince yourself that other people have worse problems, and that you should be grateful for what you have. But the truth is that pain isn't a competition. Suffering isn't something that can be measured and compared. Your pain is valid simply because it's yours. And here's a revelation that can change everything. Silence doesn't heal pain, it preserves it. When you hide your feelings so deeply that even you can't access them, they don't disappear, they crystallize. They become part of your personality structure. They influence every decision you make, every relationship you form, every opportunity you accept or reject, but in ways so subtle you don't even notice. People who carry silent pain often develop very specific relationship patterns. They feel attracted to people who need help, who have visible problems, who demand care. Not by accident, but because it's the only type of relationship they know how to navigate. They know how to give, but don't know how to receive. They know how to care, but don't know how to be cared for. They know how to be useful, but don't know how to be simply loved for who they are. The result is a life full of unbalanced relationships, where they always give more than they receive, always take on more responsibilities than they should, always put others' needs before their own. And when questioned about this, they genuinely don't see a problem. "That's just how I am," they say. "I like to help." But underneath this generosity is a sadder truth. They don't know how to exist in a relationship where they're not constantly proving their worth through utility. But things get even more complex when we understand that this silence doesn't just affect intimate relationships. It affects the relationship with work, with ambitions, with dreams. People who learn to hide their pain often also learn to hide their desires. They became so focused on not bothering, not disappointing, not being a burden, that they lost connection with what they really want from life. They choose safe careers instead of following passions that might seem selfish. They remain in situations that don't satisfy them because change might cause discomfort to others. They live small lives, not because they lack potential, but because they learned that taking up too much space is dangerous, that shining too bright might attract unwanted attention, that having their own needs is being problematic. And here we reach the most crucial point of this conversation, the moment when we need to stop just diagnosing the problem and start talking about the possibility of healing. Because there is a way out of this silence. There is a way to reconnect with your pain in a healthy manner. There is a possibility of living a life where you don't need to hide who you really are. But before talking about solutions, I need to be honest with you about something. The path out of silence is scary. When you've spent decades hiding your pain, the idea of expressing it can seem terrifying. It might seem like if you start crying, you'll never stop. It might seem like if you start talking about how you feel, you'll become a burden to everyone around you. It might seem like your pain is so big, so deep, so unacceptable, that it's better to keep it locked away forever. But here's the liberating truth. Your pain isn't as big as you imagine. It just seems enormous because you never had permission to express it in small, manageable doses. It's like a dam that accumulates water for years. When it finally opens, the pressure is overwhelming. But if you learn to open the floodgates gradually, The water flows in a controlled and healthy way. The first step out of silence is recognizing that it exists. It's admitting, at least to yourself, that you carry pains that were never completely processed, needs that were never completely met, parts of yourself that were never completely accepted. This isn't admitting weakness, it's recognizing humanity. The second step is starting to give yourself small permissions. Permission to feel sadness without immediately trying to get over it. Permission to recognize when you're overloaded without immediately looking for solutions. Permission to have emotional needs without immediately judging yourself for having them. It's a gradual process of reconnecting with parts of yourself that you learned to hide. The third step, and perhaps the most challenging, is finding safe ways to express this pain. This can be through therapy, where you have a professionally safe space to explore feelings without judgment. It can be through art, writing, music, nonverbal ways of giving outlet to what words can't capture. It can be through carefully chosen relationships with people who have demonstrated the capacity to hold space for genuine vulnerability. But perhaps the most surprising discovery in this process is this. When you stop hiding your pain, it doesn't scare people away like you imagined. In fact, your genuine vulnerability creates deeper connections than your performative strength ever did. People don't pull away from your humanity. They draw closer to it. They feel relief in being able to let their guard down too, in being able to be imperfect in your presence, in being able to share their own struggles without fear of judgment. When you begin to honor your own pain, something magical happens. You develop genuine compassion, not just for others, but for yourself. You stop judging yourself for having emotional needs. You stop demanding that you be strong all the time. You allow your humanity to exist in all its complexity, with its shadows and lights, its wounds and healings. And then you discover that your sensitivity, which you always saw as weakness, is actually an extraordinary gift. Your ability to feel deeply, to perceive emotional nuances that others don't perceive, to offer genuine understanding to those who suffer. All of this doesn't disappear when you start taking care of yourself. In fact, it becomes purer, more powerful, because it comes from a place of fullness, not emptiness. You also discover that you can maintain your caring nature without sacrificing your well-being. You can continue being the attentive ear, the available shoulder, the understanding heart, but in a balanced way where you also receive the care you offer, where you also have your suffering recognized, validated, welcomed. And perhaps the most profound transformation is this. You learn that you don't need to earn love through silent suffering, that you don't need to prove your worth by being invulnerable, that you can be loved not despite your humanity, but because of it, that your wounds, when treated with compassion, become sources of wisdom, not shame. But I want to be clear about something. This process isn't linear and it isn't fast. There are days when you'll want to return to familiar silence because it's known, even though it's painful. There are moments when expressing your vulnerability will seem too dangerous, too risky, too exposed. This is normal. Healing isn't a destination. It's a journey, and every journey has moments of doubt and setbacks. But every small step in this direction matters. Every time you allow someone to see a bit of your real vulnerability, you're breaking the pattern. Every time you honor one of your emotional needs instead of ignoring it, you're reconnecting with yourself. Every time you choose authenticity instead of performance, you're choosing life instead of survival. And here's the most beautiful truth of all. When you come out of silence, not only does your own life transform, you become living permission for others to also come out of their silences. Your courage to be vulnerable inspires others to be vulnerable. Your decision to honor your humanity gives permission for others to honor theirs. You break not just your own pattern, but contribute to breaking a cultural pattern that keeps millions of people trapped in unnecessary suffering. If you recognized yourself in this conversation, if you're one of those people who carries deep pain in the silence of your heart, I want you to know something. Your pain matters. Your feelings are valid. Your need for care is legitimate. You don't need to continue suffering alone to prove your strength. You don't need to continue being useful to deserve love. You don't need to continue hiding your humanity to be accepted in the world. The world needs your genuine sensitivity, not your performance of invulnerability. It needs your authentic compassion, which comes from having known pain intimately and chosen healing. It needs your courage to be real, to show that it's possible to feel deeply and still thrive, to demonstrate that vulnerability and Strength aren't opposites but companions in the journey of a full life. If this reflection touched something inside you, if you recognized your own experience in the words I shared, I make a special invitation. Share your story in the comments. Not all the details, not more than you feel comfortable with, but a bit of your experience with the silence that hides pain. Because your courage to speak might be exactly what someone who is still trapped in silence needs to take the first step toward healing. There's no shame in admitting you've suffered in secret. There's only courage in choosing not to suffer alone. And if this conversation made you see patterns in your life that maybe you hadn't noticed before, if it helped you understand why certain things have been so difficult, leave a like on this video. This shows me that conversations about deep emotional healing are important, that there's space in the world for us to talk about the pains that usually stay hidden. Each like is a way of saying that you value content that honors the complexity of human experience. And if you want to continue this journey of self-knowledge and healing, if you want to be part of a community where we don't need to pretend we're invulnerable, subscribe to this channel. Here we'll continue exploring the invisible wounds that shape our lives and the paths to transform them into sources of wisdom and genuine connection. Together, we can create a space where silence doesn't need to hide pain, where vulnerability is celebrated as courage, and where no one needs to suffer alone. Because the greatest truth I can leave you with today is this: you deserve to have your pain seen, understood, welcomed. You deserve to have your tears honored, your needs met, your humanity celebrated. Silence may have been your survival strategy, but you don't need to just survive anymore. You can live, you can thrive, and you can do it being exactly who you are, with all the depth, sensitivity, and imperfect beauty that implies.